They say money reveals who people really are, but I never expected it to reveal who I really was to my own family. When the lawyer cleared his throat and began reading my grandmother's will in that sterile conference room in downtown Portland, I thought I was there as a formality. After all, I was just Emma, the quiet granddaughter who lived 3 states away, worked double shifts at a veterinary clinic, and only saw everyone at Christmas. But when he spoke the words that would change everything, my sister Victoria's gasp echoed through the room like a gunshot. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and for most of my 28 years, I believed my place in the family was simple and small. I wasn't the golden child like my sister Victoria, who graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern and landed a corporate law position before she turned 25. I wasn't the charming one like my cousin Marcus, who could make Grandma Rose laugh until tears streamed down her cheeks with his impressions and stories. I was just Emma, the one who worked with animals because people seemed too complicated, who preferred books to parties, and who somehow always ended up in the background of family photos. Growing up in our cramped duplex in Sacramento, I learned early that attention was a finite resource in our house. Dad worked construction and came home too tired for conversation. Mom juggled 2 part-time jobs and barely had energy for dinner, let alone bedtime stories. Victoria, being 4 years older, naturally commanded whatever spotlight remained. She was the one with perfect grades, the debate team captain, the homecoming court nominee. I was the one who got decent B's, helped Mom with groceries, and spent Friday nights reading mystery novels while Victoria attended parties I was never invited to. When our parents died in that car accident during my sophomore year of college, Victoria stepped seamlessly into the role of family spokesperson. She handled the funeral arrangements, managed the insurance paperwork, and made all the important decisions while I stumbled through my grief in a haze of textbooks and part-time jobs. Even then, I understood my role was to be grateful, to stay out of the way, and to let the competent people handle the complicated things. Victoria moved to Chicago for her career, while I finished school in Oregon and found my calling working with injured animals at a small clinic outside Portland. We exchanged holiday cards and occasional texts, but our lives had drifted into separate orbits. Grandma Rose was different, though. She was Mom's mother, a sturdy woman with silver hair always twisted into a neat bun and hands that smelled like lavender lotion and fresh-baked bread. Her house in Spokane was where every holiday happened, where family stories were told and retold, where the good china came out and the dining room table groaned under the weight of her famous pot roast and apple pie. But even there, even in her warm kitchen filled with laughter and the sound of sizzling onions, I remained on the periphery. Victoria would regale everyone with stories from her law firm, Marcus would perform his latest comedy routine, and I would help clear dishes and listen from the kitchen doorway. Grandma Rose had a way of making everyone feel special in their own moment. She would ask Victoria about her cases, praise Marcus for his creativity, and listen to my Aunt Jennifer's endless complaints about her neighbors, with patience that bordered on saintly. When it was my turn, she would ask about the animals I treated, and I would share a story or two about a rescued kitten or a dog's successful surgery. She would nod and smile, but I always sensed she was being polite rather than genuinely interested. After all, how could stories about stray cats compare to Victoria's corporate victories, or Marcus's artistic pursuits? I accepted this dynamic because it felt natural, even protective. Being overlooked meant less pressure, fewer expectations, minimal disappointment when I inevitably fell short. When Victoria bought her downtown Chicago condo at 26, everyone celebrated her success. When I rented my small apartment above a coffee shop at the same age, it barely merited a mention. When Marcus got accepted into graduate school for theater, it was family news worthy of a group text chain. When I got promoted to senior veterinary technician, I shared it quietly during dessert at Christmas, and the conversation quickly moved on to other topics. This wasn't resentment I felt, or at least I told myself it wasn't. It was simply the order of things. Some people are born to shine, others to support. Some people command rooms, others blend into wallpaper. I had made peace with being wallpaper, especially after Mom and Dad died. Grief had a way of shrinking your world, making you grateful for any place at all, even if it was in the shadows. The last time I saw Grandma Rose was at Christmas 2 years ago. She seemed smaller than usual, more fragile, though her mind was sharp as ever. Victoria had driven up from Chicago with her boyfriend James, a fellow lawyer who wore expensive watches and spoke in important-sounding legal jargon. Marcus flew in from Los Angeles, where he was pursuing acting and waiting tables at trendy restaurants. I drove the 4 hours from Portland in my aging Honda Civic, stopping twice because the heater was acting up and I needed to warm my hands at gas station coffee machines. Dinner that night followed the usual pattern. Victoria dominated conversation with stories about her latest high-profile case, some corporate merger that would earn her firm millions. James chimed in with anecdotes about his own legal conquests, and they fed off each other's success like it was oxygen. Marcus entertained us with impressions of his eccentric acting teachers and tales from his restaurant job, including a hilarious story about accidentally serving soup to a famous director who tipped him $50. Aunt Jennifer complained about her homeowners association and her husband's snoring. Uncle Paul discussed his plans to retire early and travel the country in an RV. When the conversation eventually turned to me, I shared a story about a golden retriever named Charlie, who had been hit by a car and lost his back leg. We had fitted him with a prosthetic, and watching him learn to run again had been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career. I thought it was a good story, meaningful even, but I could see attention drifting as I spoke. Victoria checked her phone. Marcus started collecting empty plates. By the time I finished describing Charlie's first successful run on the beach, the conversation had already moved on to vacation plans. After dinner, I helped Grandma Rose wash dishes while everyone else settled into the living room to watch football and argue about politics. She seemed quieter than usual, more contemplative. I asked if she was feeling all right, and she patted my hand with her damp fingers, leaving a trace of lavender-scented soap suds on my skin. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said, but her smile seemed distant. "Just thinking about things. You know how it is when you get old. You start wondering about what really matters." I assumed she was thinking about Grandpa Joe, who had died 5 years earlier, or maybe about her own mortality. At 83, she was entitled to philosophical moments. I dried the last plate and hung up the dish towel, then joined the others in the living room where Victoria was explaining some complex legal principle to James while Marcus practiced voices for an upcoming audition. I curled up in the corner chair with a book, half listening to the familiar sounds of family dysfunction and feeling grateful to be invisible. That was the last time we spoke. Grandma Rose died quietly in her sleep 8 months later, on a Tuesday morning in September. Victoria called to tell me, her voice crisp and efficient, even through grief. The funeral would be Saturday. She would handle the arrangements. I should plan to stay through Sunday for the will reading, though she assured me it was just a formality. Grandma Rose had been very clear about her intentions over the years, Victoria said. There wouldn't be any surprises. I requested 3 days off work, bought a black dress from a thrift store, and made the drive to Spokane in my increasingly unreliable Honda. The funeral was beautiful in its simplicity. Grandma Rose had planned everything herself, choosing hymns and readings that reflected her faith and her love for family. Victoria delivered a perfect eulogy that brought tears to everyone's eyes, talking about Grandma's strength, her generosity, and her unwavering belief in the importance of family bonds. Marcus read a poem he had written about her apple pie and the way she hummed while she cooked. Aunt Jennifer shared memories of growing up with Mom and how Grandma Rose had been the steady center of their chaotic household. I wasn't asked to speak, which was fine. I wouldn't have known what to say anyway. How do you summarize someone's impact on your life when that impact was mostly quiet moments and gentle kindness? How do you explain that sometimes the person who notices you least is the person you love most? Instead, I sat in the second row and remembered the smell of her kitchen, the feel of her papery hands when she hugged me goodbye, and the way she always made sure there was vanilla ice cream in the freezer, because she knew it was my favorite. The reception afterwards was held at Grandma's house, which felt strange and empty without her presence. Victoria moved through the rooms like she owned them, accepting condolences and organizing food distribution with the efficiency of someone accustomed to taking charge. Marcus helped serve drinks and kept people laughing with gentle, appropriate humor. I found myself gravitating toward the kitchen, where I could help with dishes and avoid making awkward small talk with relatives I only saw at funerals and weddings. Late that evening, after most people had gone home, Victoria, Marcus, and I sat around Grandma's dining room table picking at leftover casserole and discussing practical matters. Victoria had already contacted a realtor about putting the house on the market. Marcus thought we should hold an estate sale for the furniture and belongings. They talked about dividing up a few sentimental items, though neither seemed particularly attached to anything except a few pieces of jewelry and some family photos. The lawyer said the will reading is at 10 tomorrow, Victoria mentioned, checking her phone calendar. Shouldn't take long. Grandma was always very organized about these things. I nodded, assuming my role would be minimal. Perhaps I would inherit a few books or some kitchen items. Maybe a small monetary gift? Enough for a nice vacation or to help with my student loans. I wasn't expecting much, and I had long ago stopped hoping for more than my allotted share of attention or affection. That night, I slept in my old bedroom at Grandma's house, the one I had used during childhood visits. The walls still held faded wallpaper with tiny roses, and the dresser still displayed a collection of ceramic horses I had been fascinated with as a little girl. Lying in the narrow twin bed, surrounded by memories of simpler times, I thought about the woman who had just died and the quiet love she had shown me over the years. It hadn't been dramatic or demonstrative, but it had been constant. Even when she seemed more interested in Victoria's achievements or Marcus's humor, she had always made room for me at her table, always asked about my work, always hugged me just as tightly when I left. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, typical Pacific Northwest weather that matched the subdued mood. We dressed in our funeral clothes again and drove to the law office in downtown Spokane, a modern building with too much glass and not enough character. Victoria drove, with Marcus in the passenger seat discussing his plans to fly back to Los Angeles that afternoon. I sat in the back, watching familiar streets pass by and wondering how long it would take to settle Grandma's affairs and return to my normal life. The law office smelled like leather furniture and expensive coffee. We were shown into a conference room with a long mahogany table and windows that looked out over the city. Victoria and Marcus took seats confidently, as if they belonged in such places. I chose a chair at the far end of the table, close to the windows where I could watch clouds gathering over the distant mountains. Mr. Patterson, Grandma Rose's lawyer, was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle manner that reminded me of my veterinary school professors. He expressed his condolences again, mentioned that he had known Grandma Rose for over 20 years, and then opened a thick folder containing official-looking documents. Rose was very specific about her wishes, he began, settling his glasses more firmly on his nose. She updated her will just 6 months ago, actually. Made some significant changes to the distribution of her assets. Victoria leaned forward slightly, the gesture of someone accustomed to important information. Marcus nodded politely, though I could tell he was already thinking about his flight. I gazed out the window and half listened, expecting to hear my name mentioned briefly somewhere near the end of the proceedings. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and began reading the formal legal language that accompanies such documents. Grandma Rose's estate was more substantial than I had realized. In addition to the house, which was worth nearly $400,000, she had savings accounts, investment portfolios. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And life insurance policies that totaled close to $800,000. It was more money than I had ever imagined one person could accumulate, especially someone who had lived so modestly. To my granddaughter Victoria, Mr. Patterson continued, I leave my pearl necklace and earring set, purchased for my own wedding day, with the hope that she will wear them on her wedding day and think of the generations of strong women who came before her. Victoria smiled, though I could sense a flicker of confusion. A jewelry set, however sentimental, was not what she had been expecting to inherit. To my grandson Marcus, the lawyer continued, I leave my husband Joe's watch collection and his vintage camera equipment, hoping that Marcus will find inspiration in the tools of a man who documented our family's happiest moments. Marcus's expression remained polite, but I could see him processing the implications. These were meaningful gifts, but they were not the substantial inheritance he had anticipated. To my niece Jennifer, I leave $5,000 and my collection of quilting supplies, with gratitude for all the years she helped organize our family gatherings. The room had grown very quiet. Victoria's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Marcus had stopped looking at his phone. Even I was paying attention now, sensing that something unexpected was happening. Mr. Patterson paused, removed his glasses to clean them, and then looked directly at me. To my granddaughter Emma Rodriguez, whom I have watched grow into a woman of extraordinary compassion and quiet strength, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes my house at 1247 Maple Street, all furnishings and personal belongings therein, my savings and checking accounts totaling approximately $320,000, my investment portfolio valued at approximately $460,000, and all life insurance benefits. The words hit the room like a physical force. Victoria's gasp was sharp and sudden, a sound of pure shock that seemed to echo off the conference room walls. Marcus's mouth actually fell open. I felt like I had been struck by lightning, my heart hammering so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Furthermore, Mr. Patterson continued, seeming to understand the gravity of the moment, Rose left a letter specifically for Emma, which I am instructed to read aloud. He opened another envelope and unfolded a piece of stationery that I recognized as the cream-colored paper Grandma Rose used for thank-you notes and birthday cards. His voice softened as he began to read her words. My dearest Emma, if you are hearing this, then I am gone, and you are probably sitting in that lawyer's office wondering why an old woman has turned your world upside down. Let me explain, sweetheart, because this decision was not made lightly, and it certainly was not made to hurt anyone else in our family. I could barely breathe. Victoria's face had gone completely white. Marcus was staring at me like I was a stranger. For years, I watched you fade into the background of our family gatherings, always helping, never asking for recognition, never demanding attention the way others did. I watched you choose a career dedicated to healing and caring for creatures who cannot speak for themselves. I watched you drive 4 hours each way to spend Christmas with family who often forgot to really see you. I watched you grieve your parents' deaths with grace and dignity, supporting yourself through school and building a quiet, meaningful life that brings comfort to others. The lawyer paused, glancing at each of us before continuing. But mostly, Emma, I watched you love this family unconditionally, even when that love was not returned with the same intensity. You never competed for attention. You never demanded your fair share of praise or recognition. You simply showed up, year after year, with your gentle smile and your willingness to help wash dishes or listen to old stories you had heard a dozen times before. That kind of love is rare, sweetheart, and it deserves to be rewarded. Victoria made a small sound that might have been a sob or a protest. I couldn't tell which. I hope you will use this inheritance to build the life you have always deserved but never demanded. Travel if you want to. Start your own veterinary practice if that appeals to you. Buy a house with a big yard where you can rescue as many animals as your heart desires. Most importantly, never forget that you matter, that your quiet strength has been the backbone of this family even when no one acknowledged it. Mr. Patterson looked up from the letter, his eyes kind behind his wire-rimmed glasses. The letter continues with some specific instructions about the house and various personal items, but that concludes the portion she wanted read aloud. The silence in the room was deafening. Victoria was staring at the table, her jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles working. Marcus kept looking between me and the lawyer as if he expected someone to announce this was all a mistake. I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching this happen to someone else. I don't understand, Victoria finally said, her voice carefully controlled but trembling at the edges. There must be some mistake, Grandma always said. She always indicated that the house would. Mr. Patterson shook his head gently. There is no mistake. Rose was very clear about her intentions. She came to my office 6 months ago specifically to make these changes. She was of sound mind and made this decision entirely on her own. But she left me jewelry, Victoria continued, and I could hear desperation creeping into her voice. Jewelry and that's it? After everything I've done for this family? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Everything she had done for this family. I thought about what that might include. The funeral arrangements she had handled so efficiently. The family updates she provided via group text. The corporate success that had made everyone proud. All important things, certainly. But as I sat there absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened, I realized that Grandma Rose had been watching different things. She had been noticing different kinds of contributions. Marcus found his voice first. Emma, did you know? Did she ever mention this to you? I shook my head, still too stunned to form coherent words. I had no idea. In all our quiet kitchen conversations, all our brief phone calls, all our gentle hugs goodbye, Grandma Rose had never hinted that she saw me as anything more than the overlooked granddaughter who helped with dishes. This is insane, Victoria said, standing abruptly. I'm calling my lawyer. There has to be something, some way to challenge this. Grandma was 83. People that age can be influenced, manipulated. Victoria, Mr. Patterson said firmly, I understand this is shocking, but I must advise you that Rose's mental capacity was never in question. She knew exactly what she was doing. This will has been properly executed and witnessed. Contesting it would be expensive and ultimately unsuccessful. Victoria turned to look at me directly for the first time since the reading began. Her eyes, which had always been sharp and intelligent, now held something I had never seen before when she looked at me. Anger. You, she said, pointing at me like I was on trial. You did something. You convinced her somehow. You were always there, always hanging around. I started, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. Always so helpful, Victoria continued, her composure finally cracking. Always so quiet and sweet. Playing the victim, making the rest of us look bad because we had actual lives and careers. That's enough, Marcus said, though his own voice sounded strained. This isn't Emma's fault. But Victoria was just getting started, isn't it? She's been manipulating this family for years with her sad little act. Poor Emma, always in the background. Poor Emma. Working with animals because she's too pathetic for a real career. Poor Emma. Driving her piece of shit car to family gatherings and looking like a charity case. Each word hit me like a physical blow. This was what my sister really thought of me. This was how she had seen me all these years, while I had been quietly loving her, quietly admiring her success, quietly accepting my place in her shadow. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady but my mind suddenly, startlingly clear. For the first time in my life, I was not the forgotten girl in the background. I was the woman my grandmother had seen all along, the woman who deserved to be remembered and valued and loved. I never asked for this, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. I never manipulated anyone. I simply loved our family, even when loving this family meant being invisible. Especially when it meant being invisible. Victoria's face was flushed now, all pretense of composure abandoned. You don't deserve this. You've never contributed anything meaningful to this family. You work at some tiny clinic, you live in a crappy apartment, you don't even have a real relationship. And yet, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice, Grandma Rose thought I deserved everything she had to give. The truth of it settled over the room like dust after an explosion. Grandma Rose, the woman we had all loved and respected, had made a choice. She had looked at our family, really looked at us, and decided that the forgotten girl in the background was the one who understood what mattered most. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should take a break to let everyone process this information. Emma, I'll need to schedule some time to go over the specific details of the inheritance and the transfer process. Victoria, Marcus, if you have questions about the items left to you, please feel free to contact my office. Victoria gathered her purse with sharp, angry movements. This isn't over, she said, though whether she was talking to me or to the lawyer or to the universe in general, I couldn't tell. Marcus stood more slowly, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Congratulations, he said finally, and I thought he might actually mean it. Grandma always did see things differently than the rest of us. After they left, I sat alone in the conference room with Mr. Patterson, watching the clouds move across the sky and trying to absorb the reality of what had just happened. I was rich. Not just comfortable, but genuinely wealthy. I owned a house that had been filled with love and laughter for decades. I had enough money to do anything I wanted, to go anywhere, to be anyone. But more than that, I had been seen. After a lifetime of being overlooked, dismissed, and forgotten, the person whose opinion mattered most had seen exactly who I was and decided I was worthy of everything she had to give. Grandma Rose had looked past Victoria's achievements and Marcus's charm and seen something in me that even I hadn't recognized. A quiet strength that held families together, a gentle love that asked for nothing in return, a compassion that made the world a little bit kinder. The forgotten girl was forgotten no more. The ride back to Grandma Rose's house was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Mr. Patterson had given me a folder thick with documents, keys to accounts I never knew existed, and contact information for financial advisors who would help me navigate this new reality. But sitting in my Honda Civic with its broken heater and duct-tape dashboard, surrounded by the trappings of my old life, I felt like I was living in two different worlds simultaneously. Victoria had stormed out of the law office without another word, but not before shooting me a look that could have frozen water. Marcus had lingered for a moment, his expression unreadable, before mumbling something about needing to catch his flight and disappearing into the elevator. Now I was alone with the weight of $800,000 and a 3-bedroom house that suddenly belonged to me. The house looked different when I pulled into the driveway. It was the same craftsman-style home with its wraparound porch and rose bushes that Grandma had tended so carefully, but now it felt like mine in a way that made my chest tight with emotion. I sat in the car for several minutes, keys heavy in my hand, trying to process what had just happened. 3 hours ago, I had been Emma Rodriguez, veterinary technician from Portland, driving a car held together with hope and monthly payments. Now I was Emma Rodriguez, homeowner and inheritor of a fortune that could change everything about my life. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the familiar entryway, breathing in the lingering scents of lavender and vanilla that had always meant comfort to me. The house felt empty without Grandma Rose's presence, but it also felt expectant, as if it were waiting to see what I would do next. I walked through each room slowly, seeing them with new eyes. The living room with its worn but comfortable furniture, the kitchen where I had spent so many holiday mornings helping with preparations, the dining room where family stories had been shared over countless meals. In Grandma's bedroom, I found more evidence of her thoughtfulness. On the nightstand was another envelope with my name written in her careful script. Inside was a shorter note that Mr. Patterson hadn't read aloud, along with a small key I didn't recognize. "Emma, dear," the note began, "if you're reading this, then you've survived the will reading and probably a good deal of family drama. I'm sorry for that, but I'm not sorry for my decision. I knew it would come as a shock, especially to Victoria, but I hope in time she will understand that love isn't always about what we expect to receive." The note went on to explain that the small key opened a safety deposit box at First National Bank, where she had stored some additional items she wanted me to have privately. Family photographs, her mother's wedding ring, and a collection of letters my grandfather had written to her during their courtship. Things that weren't valuable in monetary terms, but carried the real wealth of family history. "I also want you to know," the letter continued, "that choosing you was not about punishing anyone else. It was about recognizing the person you've become despite being overlooked for so many years. You have a gift for seeing what others need and providing it without fanfare. That's a rare quality in this world, and it deserves to be nurtured, not taken for granted." Reading those words in the quiet of her bedroom, surrounded by the furniture and belongings that now belonged to me, I finally began to cry. Not the sharp tears of shock or grief, but the deep, cleansing tears of someone who had been carrying a weight they didn't even realize was there. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly seen and valued for exactly who I was. My phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria. "We need to talk. I'm staying at the Hampton Inn on Division Street. Room 237. Come tonight." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back a simple, "Okay." Whatever she wanted to say, whatever accusations or demands she planned to make, I owed it to our relationship to hear her out. Despite everything that had happened, despite the cruel things she had said in the lawyer's office, she was still my sister, the only family I had left. I spent the afternoon walking through Grandma's house, making mental notes of what I wanted to keep, what could be donated, and what might need professional assessment for value. In the basement, I discovered boxes of family photographs dating back decades, including pictures of our parents as children that I had never seen before. There were albums documenting family vacations, birthday parties, graduations, and quiet moments that someone had thought important enough to preserve. Looking through these photographs, I began to see patterns I had missed while living through those moments. In picture after picture, there I was in the background, often blurry or partially cut off, while Victoria and Marcus commanded the center of the frame. But in some photos, I caught glimpses of Grandma Rose looking at me with an expression of warmth and attention that I had somehow missed at the time. She had been watching, noticing, valuing my presence even when I felt invisible. As evening approached, I drove to the Hampton Inn, my stomach churning with anxiety about what Victoria might say. The hotel was one of those generic business-class establishments that catered to traveling professionals, all neutral colors, and corporate efficiency. I found room 237 and knocked softly. Victoria opened the door immediately, as if she had been waiting by the peephole. She had changed out of her funeral dress into jeans and a sweater, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail that made her look younger and more vulnerable than I was used to seeing her. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and I could tell she had been crying. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let me enter. The room was standard hotel bland, with 2 double beds and a small table by the window. Victoria's laptop was open on the table, surrounded by legal documents and what looked like research printouts. "I've been looking into this," she said without preamble, gesturing to the papers. "Inheritance law, undue influence statutes, competency requirements. There has to be something we can challenge." I sat down in the room's single chair, keeping my voice gentle. "Victoria, Mr. Patterson already explained that Grandma was completely competent when she made these changes. She knew what she was doing." "That's what he says," Victoria snapped, but there was less fire in her voice than there had been at the law office. "But people can be manipulated, especially elderly people. You were there all the time, Emma. You had access to her, opportunity to influence her decisions." "I visited twice a year," I said quietly. "Christmas and her birthday." "The same as you." Victoria's composure cracked a little. "But you called her, you sent cards, you were always checking in." "Because I cared about her," I said. "Because after Mom and Dad died, she was the only grandparent we had left. Because she was lonely sometimes, and a phone call cost nothing but meant everything to her." Victoria sank onto the bed across from me, her shoulders sagging. "I don't understand it. I worked so hard to make her proud. I became successful, financially stable. I thought that's what she wanted for all of us." For the first time, I heard vulnerability beneath Victoria's anger. "She was proud of you," I said. "She talked about your success all the time. She kept every newspaper clipping that mentioned your law firm." "Then why?" Victoria's voice broke on the question. "Why would she leave everything to you? What did I do wrong?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I had missed for years. Beneath all her competence and achievement, Victoria was just as insecure as I was, just as desperate to be loved and valued. The difference was that she had tried to earn that love through accomplishment, while I had tried to earn it through service. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. "But maybe Grandma saw that you didn't need her approval to know your worth. You've always been confident, successful, sure of your place in the world. She probably figured you'd be fine, no matter what happened." "But I wanted her to choose me," Victoria whispered. "I wanted to be the one she trusted with the family legacy." The pain in her voice was real and raw, and despite everything that had happened, I felt my heart break for her. "She did trust you," I said. "She trusted you to handle the funeral arrangements, to take care of the family when she was gone. She gave you the pearl necklace because she wanted you to wear it on your wedding day, to carry on the tradition of strong women in our family. Victoria shook her head. That's not the same thing. You got everything, Emma. The house, the money, the real inheritance. I got jewelry, and the assumption that I'll be fine on my own. I thought about Grandma Rose's letter, about her words regarding the recognition of quiet strength and unconditional love. Maybe she thought you were already fine, I said. Maybe she saw that you had built a life you were proud of, and she wanted to give me the chance to do the same. By giving you $800,000? Victoria's tone was bitter again. By giving me the confidence to believe I deserved it, I replied. Victoria, I've spent my entire life feeling like the consolation prize in this family. The backup daughter, the one who got attention only when there was no one more interesting around. Do you know what it felt like to discover that someone had been watching all along? Someone had seen value in me that I couldn't see in myself. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. I never thought of you as a consolation prize, she said finally. You never thought of me at all, I said, not unkindly, but truthfully. None of you did. I was just Emma, reliable Emma, quiet Emma, always there when you needed someone to help or listen or clean up. But never Emma the person with dreams and feelings and worth of her own. That's not true, Victoria protested, but her voice lacked conviction. When was the last time you asked me about my life? I asked. Not my job, not my health, but my actual life. My hopes, my fears, my dreams for the future. When was the last time you called me just to talk, not because you needed something or had family news to share? Victoria opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of missed connections and unequal relationships. I'm sorry, she said finally, and I could tell she meant it. I'm sorry I never saw how dismissive we all were. I'm sorry I said those horrible things at the lawyer's office. I was just so shocked, so hurt that she hadn't chosen me. I understand, I said. I probably would have reacted the same way if our positions were reversed. No, Victoria said firmly. You wouldn't have. You would have been happy for me, because that's who you are. You would have hugged me and congratulated me and probably offered to help me figure out what to do with it all. She was right, and we both knew it. The recognition hung between us like a bridge we could choose to cross or burn down forever. What are you going to do with it? Victoria asked. The inheritance, I mean. I had been thinking about that question all afternoon, walking through Grandma's house and imagining the possibilities. I don't know yet, I said honestly. Maybe start my own veterinary practice. Maybe travel for a while. Maybe just live in the house and figure out who I am when I'm not struggling to pay rent every month. Victoria nodded slowly. She would have liked that. Grandma, I mean. She always said you had a calling with animals, that you were meant to heal things. She said that? All the time. She used to worry that you were working for someone else when you clearly had the skills to work for yourself. She just thought you didn't believe in yourself enough to take the risk. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Grandma Rose hadn't just been leaving me money. She had been giving me the security to take risks, to bet on myself, to build the life I had been too afraid to pursue. Victoria, I said carefully, I want you to know that this doesn't have to change everything between us. We're still sisters. We're still family. Victoria laughed, but it wasn't entirely bitter. Everything already has changed, Emma. You're not the poor relation anymore. You're not the one who needs help, or charity, or patience. You're the one with the house and the money and the freedom to do whatever you want. That doesn't mean I don't still need my sister, I said. Victoria looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing my words, trying to decide whether to trust them. Maybe, she said finally, maybe we can figure out how to be sisters when we're equals, instead of when one of us is always helping the other. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. We talked for another hour, carefully navigating around the raw wounds left by the day's revelations. Victoria told me about her life in Chicago, and for the first time, I heard the loneliness beneath her professional success. I told her about my work at the clinic, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely interested in the stories I shared. When I finally left the hotel, we hugged goodbye, and it felt different than our usual perfunctory embraces. There was recognition in it, an acknowledgement that we were both different people than we had been that morning. Driving back to Grandma's house, I thought about the conversation and about Victoria's question regarding what I would do with the inheritance. The truth was, I had ideas, but no concrete plans. For so long, my life had been about survival, about making ends meet and getting by. Now I had the luxury of choice, and that was both thrilling and terrifying. I spent that night in Grandma's guest room, surrounded by the familiar sounds of the old house settling and the distant hum of traffic on the main road. I lay awake thinking about the woman who had slept down the hall for so many years, who had watched our family dynamics with quiet wisdom, and made a decision that changed everything. The next morning, I drove to the bank to access the safety deposit box Grandma had mentioned in her note. The box contained exactly what she had promised: photographs, letters, and a simple gold wedding band that had belonged to her mother. But there was also something else, something she hadn't mentioned in her note. At the bottom of the box was a small leather journal with "For Emma" written on the cover in Grandma Rose's handwriting. Inside, I found pages of her thoughts and observations about our family, written over the course of several years. Some entries were brief notes about phone conversations we had shared. Others were longer reflections on family gatherings and her observations about each of us. Reading through the journal, I began to understand that Grandma Rose's decision hadn't been sudden or emotional. It had been the result of years of careful observation and thought. She had noticed things that the rest of us missed: the way I always made sure everyone had enough food before filling my own plate, the way I listened when others talked without interrupting or trying to redirect attention to myself, the way I cleaned up after family gatherings without being asked. But more than that, she had noticed my dreams and the way I had set them aside for practical concerns. In one entry, she wrote about a conversation we had shared 2 Christmases ago, when I had mentioned wanting to start my own veterinary practice but feeling like it was impossible because of student loans and startup costs. "Emma has so much to offer the world," she had written, "but she doesn't believe she deserves to claim the space she needs to offer it. She spent so long being grateful for scraps of attention and affection that she can't imagine asking for a full meal. Maybe this inheritance will teach her that she has always deserved the full meal." Sitting in the bank parking lot, reading my grandmother's private thoughts about me, I finally understood the true gift she had given me. It wasn't just money or property. It was permission to believe in myself, to claim the space I needed, to stop apologizing for existing, and start celebrating the unique contributions I could make to the world. I called my supervisor at the veterinary clinic and gave my 2 weeks' notice. Then I called a realtor about looking at commercial properties in Portland, spaces that could house a small animal hospital with a focus on rescue and rehabilitation. I called the financial advisor Mr. Patterson had recommended and scheduled a meeting to discuss investment strategies and business loans. For the first time in my adult life, I was planning for abundance instead of scarcity, for growth instead of survival, for success instead of getting by. The funeral flowers had barely wilted, but I was already becoming someone new. Not because I had money now, but because someone had seen me clearly enough to know I deserved it. Grandma Rose had given me more than an inheritance. She had given me a legacy of self-worth that no one could ever take away. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of Rose's pet hospital, named in honor of the woman who had made it possible. The waiting room was full of clients and their beloved animals, and through the treatment room windows, I could see my small staff working with the same dedication and compassion that had drawn me to veterinary medicine in the first place. Victoria visited for the grand opening, bringing James and a bottle of champagne to celebrate. We had talked several times since that night in the hotel, slowly rebuilding our relationship on more equal footing. It would never be the same as it had been before, but it was better. More honest, more genuine, more reciprocal. Marcus had also stayed in touch, calling occasionally to check on how I was adjusting to my new life. He had booked a recurring role on a television series and was finally making enough money to quit waiting tables. We joked that Grandma Rose's influence was still working in the family, inspiring all of us to take risks and pursue our dreams. Standing in my clinic that day, watching animals being healed and families being reunited with their healthy pets, I thought about the journey that had brought me there. It had started with feeling forgotten and invisible, but it had led to a place where my work mattered, where I was building something meaningful, where I was finally living up to the potential Grandma Rose had seen in me all along. The forgotten girl was forgotten no more, But more importantly, she had learned that she had never been as forgotten as she thought. Someone had been watching. Someone had been valuing her contributions. Someone had been planning for her future even when she couldn't imagine it herself. And that, I realized, was the greatest inheritance of all. The knowledge that love doesn't always look like attention, recognition doesn't always sound like applause, and sometimes the people who believe in us most are the ones who show it through action rather than words. Grandma Rose had been watching, and when the time came to speak, she had spoken clearly. The forgotten girl had always been seen, she just hadn't known it yet. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.